Hi, I'm the Lockpicking Cuber, and in this video I'm going to have a look at a really remarkable lock that was sent to me by Dave from California. So you can see what I mean about it being remarkable when you have a look at this key. So this is a magnetic lock with a magnetic key. We have 8 of these little magnets inserted here on the key, and you can sort of see that they line up with these grub screws on the outside of the lock. And if we put the key in, we can turn and open the lock. If we take the key out, the lock is locked and this will no longer turn. In this video I'm going to explain how the lock works. I'm going to take it apart and show you the insides, and I'm also going to have a go at picking it and talk about what I think are the limitations of picking with this particular lock. The first thing I'd like to say is that it's a beautiful idea and beautifully constructed. I think the machining on this is extraordinary, and you can sort of, I don't know if you can see this, but the smoothness with which the lock turns is amazing. It feels like butter. And part of that I think is a result of the magnets in the lock reducing the friction between the layers. But in any case, the machining is very good, which also makes a big difference. So how does this lock work? Well, I'm going to show you by comparison with a regular lock. So this is a regular American 1100 padlock, but that has been cut open so that we can see the insides. And you may already know how this kind of lock works, or you may not, so I'm just going to explain it very briefly. This is a pin tumbler lock, and the way this works, that is, if I put the key in here, you can see all these little tumblers going up and down, up and down, up and down, and at the end they all end up at the same kind of height. And what's happening there is that they're all lined up nicely so this cylinder inside the lock can move. And the reason that this works is because we have, instead of there just being one pin at each position, there are 2. So you can just about see this on this one here. Let's just get this really close. So you can just see that we've got 2 pins here, and the one that is you can only see part of it up at the top there is currently blocking the cylinder from turning. So if I try to turn it like this, it won't turn, and that's because there's a pin there, part of which is sort of inside the cylinder and part of which is outside. And so we call this being across the shear line. The shear line is this sort of line that goes between this internal cylinder and the rest of the body. And when I put the key in, which has these notches or bitting arranged in the correct way to get all these pins lined up, then all these pins are set so that one of them is just below the shear line and the other one is just above the shear line, and none of them are actually across the shear line, and that enables the lock to turn. Okay, it's exactly the same principle here, except, well, as you'll see, there's just 1 pin instead of 2. And instead of it being physically pushed up or down by the bitting on the key, magnets are either pulling the pins downwards or pushing the pins upwards. But in either case, the magnets are causing the pins to end up not blocking the shear line so that the lock can turn. So the same principle, in other words, as a pin tumbler lock. And the question I'm going to be asking later is therefore, is it possible to pick it in the same way as a pin tumbler lock? So we'll see. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to take out all these pins and show you what they're like and just give you an idea of how this works. So Dave very handily provided the correct size of Allen key. And notice that all the pins are numbered here. This is going to become useful later. So we have pin 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. They go in a kind of spiral around the key. So this is pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Okay, so let's take pin 1 out and see what we've actually got in there. So for each of them we have one of these little grub screws, and then in this case, whoops, dropped it. In this case we also have a little magnet. What just happened? Oh, it went inside the lock. There we go. Okay, so what we have in each of these positions is we have a little grub screw, and there's a couple of different types of these, and then we have a magnetic pin. And the arrangement is such that we have, in this case, we have a screw that is not magnetized. Actually, in practice, it is very, very slightly magnetic. So you can sort of see it will just about hold the magnet there. but that's just, I think it's been magnetized by the magnet. In principle, it's not magnetized. And in other cases, as you'll see, the grub screw is magnetized, and it's designed either to pull the magnet up, the pin up, or push it away downwards, and then the key will have some other effect, either pushing the pin back up or pulling it downwards. So there we have pin 1. I'm going to put these in a pinning tray, although as you'll see, it is basically impossible to keep them in the right place because they love to jump around. Anyway, that was pin 1. Let's have a look at number 2. So in this case we have a grub screw, and Dave has very conveniently labelled them with colours, so we can tell that the north or positive orientation is at this end of the grub screw. So it's very helpful for reconstructing it later. I'll just pull the magnet out using this. And here we have the magnet. Now these have also been labelled in the same kind of way, but what I found is that the colouring, the ink or paint or whatever it was, has worn off in many cases. So it's a little hard to tell. But actually it doesn't matter. Okay, now 5, you'll notice something a little different. So what we have here again is the grub screw. This time it's got the south or negative polarity shown with the black colouring there. But this time, if you look carefully, you can see that this little magnetic pin is actually spooled. And actually half of the pins in this lock, numbers 5, 6, 7 and 8, are all these little spools, magnetic spools, which is a nice addition. My pinning tray only has 7 slots. Anyway, this is another non-magnetic grub screw, and then another spooled pin. You can just about see the red colouring on the end there to indicate the northern polarity there. Okay, so now we have all the pins out. Now I'm going to take the lock apart and show you what it looks like inside. Now Dave very kindly provided this tool. I've never seen one of these before. Maybe it's familiar to you, but it wasn't familiar to me. But it's just to remove this C-ring from the back that holds the lock together. It's a lovely tool, but I just find it so counterintuitive. I want to squeeze it when I'm supposed to separate and vice versa. But anyway. So there's the ring. Now, having removed the ring and all the pins, the cylinder from the center can just, well, first of all, it can rotate freely. Nothing's keeping it from turning, but it can also just slide out. And again, you can see how smoothly this brass moves in there. It's really lovely. So you can probably get a little bit of a sense now for how this works. So you'll notice these indentations, which again correspond with these holes where the grub screws go and also correspond with the magnets on the key, and that they're at different heights. So the idea is, for example, that it might be that in the case of a deeper hole, in order to get that pin to be set, in order to have the lock be turnable, we want to get this magnetic pin all the way down there in the hole. You see, so it's flush with the shear line, which is here. And probably in that particular case, we'll have had a magnet that's pulling it upwards so that it is just blocking the shear line. And then when we use the key, we'll repel it, pull it back down inwards towards the center, which will get it off the shear line. So that's the principle behind the lock. Whoops. This is where you have to be really careful. I'm not too worried about getting them muddled up because Dave very kindly provided instructions for how to put it back together again. Okay, so this is the inside of the lock. A really lovely piece of machinery and a really beautiful object, actually. Notice, by the way, that he's marked on here with this black line. That's the locked position. And probably my only complaint about this lock is, I'll show you this properly, but if you put the key in and unlock it, then obviously you can turn, but there's nothing holding the key in place, there's nothing key retaining here, so at this point I could remove the key, and even with the pins in place the cylinder will still turn. If I get it back to here, it will lock again as all the pins sort of snap back into place. But if you've got it, if you take the key out even just 1 degree off from locked, the lock is actually still open. So from a security point of view, obviously that would be a bit of a weakness. From a locksport point of view, it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't affect the fun. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put the lock back together again, but I'm going to do it 1 pin at a time, and you'll see why. So first of all, I'm going to put this C-ring back on the back. If I can do the right thing with this tool. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put pin 1 in. Now, I mentioned earlier Dave provided some instructions here, so this is he labelled it with hint number 2 if needed, and I very much needed it. So what this tells me is for each of the 8 pins, it tells me whether the key is pulling or pushing on the pin in order to get it set. And then he goes into the details, so we know here that the key polarity is positive. So what that means is that if I take pin 1 on the key here, then this is a northern upwards magnet. The key pin polarity is the other way around. So that just tells me, as we could deduce from the fact that it's a puller, that the end of the key pin that faces the key is negative, so it's being pulled by the key. The pin type is standard, so not a spool. And then the grub screw polarity is 0, which just means it doesn't have a polarity, it's not magnetized. Others are either positive or negative. And you can see you've got all kinds of combinations here. So you've got standard pins that are pullers and pushers, and you've got spool pins that are pullers and pushers. Okay, so I'm going to use this, which tells me that the key polarity is positive and the key pin polarity is negative. And this is the one I need to know. So I'm going to be putting the negative end of the pin downwards into the lock, and I'm going to be using a non-magnetic grub screw for pin 1. So that would be this grub screw, and then you can actually use any of the pins to go either way, but if I can find one that's got a residue of black on it, I'll use that, because it just means I'm doing it the way that Dave intended. So this one just has enough black on to tell me that this is the right one. So I'm going to put that in here, into the hole for pin 1. And let's just watch what happens. If I put the key in, we'll see a few things happen. As I push the key in, that magnetic pin, whoa, it's going to jump out. And the reason it jumped out is because it was being repelled by this pin. Although this is the pin 1 magnet, which is going to attract it downwards, this one, which is 1, 2, 3, is number 5. If we look on Dave's handy instruction sheet, then we'll see that the key polarities on 1 and 5 are opposite. So as the key goes in, it's pushing the pin up first when it gets to this position, and then when you get it to the correct position, it's pulled the pin back down again. Okay, so I'm going to put that pin back in. Make sure I get it the right way around. There we go. And then I'm going to put the non-magnetic grub screw in there. Screw that into place. By the way, oops, it's very important when doing this to make sure that the lock is in the closed position, because otherwise you end up with the, in some cases anyway, with the magnetic pin dropping down into the wrong hole, and then the lock is basically unusable. You have to dismantle it and start again, as I found to my cost. Right. Okay, so right now we have a lock. It works. I can put the key in to open it. If I remove the key, the lock is in this locked position. Can't unlock it. But it's only being held in by 1 pin. So I'm just going to demonstrate what we can do with that. Now, Dave provided a couple of picking tools that he made. So these are just long non-magnetic rods with a small magnet attached to the end of each, and you can maybe just about see the colouring on there. One of them's marked red and one of them was black, but the black has worn off a bit. So what we have here is effectively just a couple of the pins, the magnets, sorry, from the key, and we can use those to try to pick this open. So again, if we look at the information here about pin 1, the key polarity is positive, so that means I want to use this red coloured picking tool. So if I just insert this, line it up with pin 1 where it sticks nicely, then the cylinder will turn freely, and we've opened the lock. So if we had a variant of this lock that just had 1 pin, trivial to open. Question is, what if we have all 8 pins? And I'm going to work my way up there and show you what we find as we go. So the first thing I'm going to note, by the way, is that this is a puller, and what that means is, as I said, when I put this in here, it gets attracted to the pin. And I think this is really important because it doesn't make any difference really to the way the key feels, or the way it behaves, at least in terms of unlocking it. But with picking, it's very important because when I'm using a puller, it attracts, it sticks really comfortably in the right slot. When you're trying to use a pusher, so if it were the same pin and I needed to push it, I would put in the opposite polarity. And actually now the tool itself is discouraged from being in the right position. It's pushed away by the magnetism from the correct pin. And this introduces some interesting challenges. So for that reason, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to skip pin 2. Pin 2 is a pusher, and I'm going to go for pin 3 next. We will come back to the pusher pins and we'll talk about those a bit later, but I just wanted to move on to just having puller pins. So I'm actually going to do pin 1, 3, 6 and 8 first, and then we'll come back to the pusher pins. So that means I'm going to do pin 3 next, for which I need a positive polarity key pin and another non-magnetic grub screw. So here we go. Here's a non-magnetic grub screw, and I think one of these a positively labelled one. Nope. This is what always happened to me, by the way. I'd always neatly line them up in the slots in the pinning tray here, and they'd always end up just stuck together. It does mean, though, that it's a lot harder to lose them, because even if you drop a pin or it flies out, they tend to just jump to each other rather than running away into the carpet. Okay, so we're going to put this into slot 3 here. Oops. And this kind of neutral grub screw, in that goes. There we go. And let's have a look and see what we can do. So, okay, first of all, just to demonstrate that this still works, there it is, being unlocked by the key. If I take the key out and try to turn it from the back here, it won't turn. So I'm going to start by not putting the lock under tension at all. I'm just going to use the magnet to find pin 1. Okay, so pin 1 is now set, so what that means is that pin 1 has sort of dropped down, it's been pulled into the body, into the core here. Now what I'm going to do is just apply a tiny bit of tension from the back. I'm just going to turn it. I'm not really going to be putting tension on, just so much as holding it in place. And that, I think, is just holding pin 1 down there, just from a little bit of friction. Now for pin 3, we have the opposite polarity, as we can see from Dave's instructions here. So pin 1, the key polarity was positive, pin 3, the key polarity is negative. So I'm going to use the other tool, the one with the negative polarity magnet on it, and I'm going to see if I can get pin 3 to set. Oh, I felt it actually. There we go. Okay. So there we have the really basics of a demonstration that single pin picking could be possible with this lock. So what I did there is I set pin 1, then I put the lock under a tiny bit of tension just to keep that pin set, and then I set pin 3, and then the lock opened. Having got it back to being locked, it's now locked again, so I'll just demonstrate that again, and then we'll move on. So I'll set pin 1. Oh, this is an interesting thing I found, is that sometimes to get it to actually lock, you have to give it a bit of a shake. So let's just make sure. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to just try this again. So with pin 1, I'm going to get that set and then put a tiniest bit of tension on there. Let's see if I can set pin 3 again. Oops. There we go. You get a really nice click. I'm not sure if you can hear it. I can hear it, but I can definitely feel it, like a really nice vibration, much cleaner than picking with a pin tumbler lock. By the way, this is another thing I've noticed from a security point of view, is if you pick the pins using these kind of magnets, for some reason this becomes possible. even quite slowly, I can put it into the locked position and the pins don't fall naturally into place. I think what's happening here, it's just my hypothesis, is that this doesn't happen with the key. So if I put the key in, and open it that way, when I get it back to this position, obviously the lock will still turn. If I remove the key, I think what's happening is the act of the extra magnets moving past the pins is pushing them back across the shear line, and so now it always ends up locked. So I've never found it to be the case that I could remove the key and the cylinder will still turn. Whereas when I'm doing this kind of single pin picking, it quite often happens, so there's something there. Okay, so we've picked it with 2 pins. Let's see what happens if we add a 3rd pin. So for the 3rd pin, we're going to go for the 3rd puller, which is number 6, and that's one of these spool pins. It's a negative key pin polarity and another neutral grub screw. Now, the ink has pretty much come off this pin, so I'm going to check it using the pick here. So I want to put the negative end down into the lock, and I think, yeah, that's this end. Oops. So I'm going to test it against the positive there. Yeah, there we go, so those are retracted. So that means that this is the negative end, which is the one I want to put downwards into the space for pin 6. So there it is, you can see it. And now this is going to go in there. Okay, so now we have 3 pins in here. Again, the key works. If I take it out, the lock won't open. Now let's have a look and see if we can pick this. Now I'm actually going to put it in the vise now, because once we get to 3 pins it gets a little trickier to hold it. Alright, so I've got the lock into the vise here. Just make sure that it actually works with the key, and I can't turn it and open it just from the back there. This is how I'm going to be applying tension again. I'm just going to be using my fingers, and again it's going to be really even less than what we'd think of as light tension on a normal lock. I'm really just holding it in place. Okay, so we have our 2 tools, the positive polarity and the negative polarity one. I'm going to start by setting pin 1 again, and then see where we can go from there. So if we get pin 1, which is nice and easy to find because it really pulls the pick in there, and then hold that. And I'm going to see if I can set pin 3. Oops, wrong tool. Now I'm going to see if I can set pin 3 using the other tool. Ah, there, I got it. Okay, that's pin 3. Now I'm going to see if I can pick pin 6 using the positive polarity pick tool here. Oh, there we go. Okay, I got it. So what I was finding here is that for the time I get to the 3rd pin, the magnet on the pick is just barely strong enough. So I think with the 4th pin I might need to add a magnet onto this to make it strong enough. But anyway, again, proof of concept, we can single pin pick this lock when it has just 3 pins in. But notice again, these are still just pullers. So we're going to come back to pushers a bit later. Alright, so now let's get the 4th and final puller pin into place. So this is number 8. It's a positive key pin polarity and another neutral grub screw. Okay, make sure the key works, and it's locked. Right, so let's get that back in there. Let's see if we can pick it with all 4 puller pins in place now. This is the next step. Okay, it's rather later now, and I've been having a go at picking this with just the 4 puller pins in, using the tools that Dave provided, and I couldn't get it. The conclusion I came to was that the magnets that David put on these picks, whilst fine for picking with just 1 or 2 or even 3 pins, just weren't strong enough to work with 4 pins. So I made myself a little tool. So it's just a pair of picking tweezers, pin tweezers, with a magnet held in the end, much stronger magnet than those ones, and I just marked red and black so I can remember the orientation. And watch this. It just takes a few seconds. Just to make absolutely sure there's nothing dodgy going on, I'll do that again. So just put the key in, it opens, lock it up. This will not turn now. So what's happening is, as it happens, I don't know if this is deliberate on Dave's part or not, but pins 1 and 3 opposite each other have opposite polarities. And the same with the other 2 pullers, which is 6 over here and 8 over here, have opposite polarities. All that I'm doing is I'm pushing it up to the top for 1, then down for 3, and then twisting it 90 degrees, going across and across, and it gets it open. Almost with no tension required at all. There we go, and we've got that open. So with 4 pins and a more powerful magnet, we can pick this easily. Now this is not just any 4 pins though, these are 4 puller pins. So the question is, what can we do when we have pusher pins in place? So let's try that next. Okay, so back to the basics. I've got this pinned with just 1 pin now, which is number 2, and as you can see from Dave's list, number 2 is the first pusher with a negative key polarity. So I'm going to continue using my extremely ugly device. By the way, I've wrapped this tape around partly so the ink would stay on, but also partly to try to protect the internals. I'm aware there are some bits I haven't covered, so I'm hoping I'm not scratching it too badly. Anyway, unsurprisingly, it's pretty easy to pick it open just using 1 pin, even when it's a pusher. So with a pusher pin, there we go. Now, the reason I say even when it's a pusher, there's a big difference. When you're going for pin 1, or any puller, the magnet gets attracted to the pin, so you really know you've got it, and actually you can feel really clearly the difference between setting the pin and not setting it. It's an amazing feeling, actually. So in a sense, from a locksport point of view, this is a bit of a dream. With the puller pins. With the pusher pins, it's the opposite effect. When you're in the right place, the pin is trying to push your pick out of the way. And so in a sense, you sort of have to get used to resisting what's happening. But it's actually not that hard, at least with 1 pin. So picking 1 pusher pin, straightforward. Now let's try 2. All right, back in the clamp, we have 2 pins now. So we have pin 2 over here and pin 4 over here. And again, they are opposite each other and opposite polarities. So I'm hoping that will help me again. So let's have a go. We'll do pin 2 and then pin 4. There we go. Not too difficult. Let's just try that again. Just make sure it's set. I'll use the key to show that it is correctly pinned. Actually, just to convince myself it's correctly pinned. There we go. And then, yeah, I'll do it this way around. 2 and 4. Yeah, again, very easy. Okay, so now we have 3 pins in there. I've actually got 2, 4, and 7. And 7 is one of the spools. I need to be very aware of that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 2, 4, 7. And 4 and 7 are both positive and 2 is negative. So let's see what we can do with that. And 7, the one down at the bottom, is the spool. So that's the security pin. Just 1 at the moment. There are 4 in total when we have all 8 pins in, but right now I just have this 1 security pin. I think I'm going to try and set that security pin first, if at all possible. It's so hard to tell. Occasionally you get a nice click. Oh, and then a little bit of movement. That was interesting. I wonder if that means it's in a false set, effectively. So I've been playing with this for a while now, and I haven't yet managed to pick it with 3 pushers in place. I have managed to pick it with 2 pushers where one of them is a spool, so it isn't just the presence of a spool. I've also managed to pick it with 2 pushers next to each other as well as opposite each other. For For some reason though, when I add in a third pin, no matter which pin it is, it becomes a lot harder. Not really sure I understand why. It could be that I'm using too much tension, but I'm also inclined to think with these pushers, it's a little bit like having a spring in there as you would in a standard pin tumbler lock. If we have a look in here, you can see that pushing these pins into place are a set of springs. And in this case, instead of springs, we have magnetism, and they're only on the pushers. So the pullers all have these non-magnetic grub screws, but the pushers all have magnetic grub screws pushing the pins down into the core here. And what I've got to do is push it up out of the core above the shear line, and that makes me think maybe just slightly more tension is required to get it to stick past the shear line when there's a magnet trying to push it away back downwards. Alright, I'm going to have one more final try, see if I can get anywhere here. So I'm going to start by setting, or trying to set, the pin 7 down at the bottom. I don't know if you can hear it, but you get a kind of a nice click with it actually. So on the one hand, if I use too much tension, my magnet won't be strong enough to push the pins past the shear line, potentially. If I use too little tension, then the pins will get just pushed back down again. So I think the secret to this is going to be finding exactly the right amount of tension to apply, just as with picking single pin on a pin tumbler lock actually. So although it is very different in some ways, present some of the same kinds of challenges. Alright, well, I think I have to declare myself defeated by Dave's amazing magnetic lock. As I've said, it is very definitely quite easy to pick the puller pins, of which there are 4. I can pick 2 of the pusher pins, but only when there are just 2, and as soon as we add a third one in, I don't seem to be able to get it anymore. So that makes me think I could potentially, with more practice, get there in the end. I feel like when I first tried this, I thought, no, this is unpickable, it's impossible. But now that I've played with it for a few weeks, I am pretty convinced it's possible to pick. I think it takes some practice, and I think it really takes getting used to these pusher pins. The feeling of the resistance from the magnets is a very new experience and a difficult one to deal with. It'd be funny if I just suddenly picked it now, wouldn't it? But no, it's not going to happen. Anyway, I've loved this lock. Thank you so much to Dave for sending it to me. I think it's a beautiful piece of machining, beautiful tool, beautiful object. Kind of a beautiful puzzle as well as a lock, and I think that was really Dave's intent. As I understand from Dave, he's an amateur lock maker rather than a lock picker. He's clearly a very competent engineer, I would say. So for quick final thoughts, I've just pinned this up a little differently. So we've got pins 1, 3, 5 and 8 in there. So 1, 3 and 8 are all pullers. 5 is a pusher, and both 5 and 8 are spools. So I just wanted to demonstrate the ideas with a different variety of pin types in there. I'm just going to tension it from the back again with my fingers. Absolutely minimal tension, really. So there's 1 and 3, and then down to the back for 8, and then up for pin 5. No, not quite. Let's try that again. So 1 and 3. Okay, so it is possible to pick it with a combination, including a pusher. One more try. I've got added in pin 6 this time, so we've got 1, 3, 5, 6 and 8, so we've got all 4 pullers and 1 pusher. just to see if I can pick that. So let's see, that's pin 1 and that's pin 3. I'm actually not applying any tension at all here. What I'm finding is that these first ones, you can get them without tension. So there's 6 and there's 8, right? So I think I may have all the pullers set. So now I just need to come back a little. Get the lost pusher. No, lost it. Just try that again. So that's 1, 3, 6, 8. There we go. And that was pin 5. So that's picking it with all 4 pullers and 1 pusher. A few things I wanted to say. One thing is I mentioned this small security flaw, so I'll demonstrate it now just with these 4 pins, and if I put the key in and turn it, it works beautifully. Of course I can take the key out at any point, so there's no key retaining mechanism. And the small problem with that is if I take the key out, say I unlock the door and then I lock it again, take the key out, but I've just left it just 1 degree off, now it's perfectly possible to just open it using your fingers. Really small issue that would only really matter if this was being used in a security setting. From a locksport point of view, it really doesn't matter at all. I mentioned this to Dave and we agreed that a key retaining mechanism wouldn't be too hard probably to add in. I guess it would have to be a mechanical key retaining mechanism, because if you used a magnetic mechanism, you could just apply enough force to pull the key out against it, I suppose. Another thing I wanted to mention is tensioning. So I've obviously been tensioning from the back here. In reality, of course, if this were in a security setting in a door, you wouldn't be able to get at the back and you'd have to tension it, I think, using fingers on the front here. I have done that a few times and it's not too hard. It's a little awkward. Can't do it while I'm holding it. You have to put it in the vise, of course. The other option would be to tension it the way that's intended by the lock. So the key has this notch here, and then let's see if you can see that down in the bottom back of the keyway. We've got this sort of fixed pin, and the notch interacts with that pin, and that's how it tensions. So of course you could theoretically put a tool down in there and push against that pin. The trouble would be getting a tool down in there that would push on it that wouldn't block your access to the magnetic pins. Another thought that I had was whether it might be possible to rake this in some way, and I think maybe this tool would not quite be enough, because you couldn't just rake it like this. You'd have to be able to twist it and pull it in and out and do a whole bunch of other movements. I have never yet successfully managed to rake it with more than just 1 or 2 pins in there. Maybe it would be possible. Maybe the way to do it would be with electromagnets rather than moving this in and out, but rather have a bunch of electromagnets whose polarities can be switched electronically. I think you could imagine making a device that was something like this, with magnets in place that were electromagnets, and just switching all the combinations would probably be the brute force way to open this. Another point I wanted to make, of course, is that when I'm picking this somewhat successfully in its somewhat constrained version with fewer pins, I know where the pins are and I know what their polarities are. So in a sense, this is a little bit like knowing the bitting of the key and knowing exactly how far you have to push each pick. And you can't really figure this out just from the feel, because in some cases you're going to find that the pick is attracted to the pin where in fact it should be repelling the pin. So actually that is an additional layer of challenge that I didn't face because I knew the orientations of all the pins. Oh yeah, the final thing I wanted to mention is a few times I think I referred to this as being pin 1 down here, but of course it's the other way around. This is pin 1 and they work their way around spirally to pin 8, but I just got confused for a few seconds. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed watching me explore Dave's really quite fantastic magnetic lock. I've really loved playing with this over the last few weeks. I'm sad that I've been defeated by it. I feel like I'm close enough that I believe it is possible to pick, single pin pick. I can imagine it might be possible to rake, as I said, perhaps with some sort of electronic key rather than just a purely physical magnetic one. But I've still had a lot of fun with it, yeah, thanks so much again to Dave for sending this to me. Hope you've enjoyed watching the video. If you have, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.